Welcome everybody, and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for over 11 years now. And with over 110,000 members working right across the built and natural environment, there's a huge opportunity for data and technology to impact in a positive way the way our members work. And indeed, my role is to look at the whole impact of data and technology right across that built environment, right across all the different assets of land, residential, commercial, infrastructure, alternative assets, and right across that whole property life cycle that our members work in, all the way through land, planning, development, construction, valuation, brokerage, finance, building operation, and indeed end of life. And today I'm really pleased to have Brian and Hannah join me from Addland, so please join me on the call.
Morning, Andrew.
Morning.
Morning, both of you. Great to have you on the call. And before we kind of get into the bits and the bytes and the data and technology, it's always nice to have a bit of a kind of human element. So it'd be great if Hannah and Brian, you could introduce yourselves and give us a bit of an origin story of Adlan itself. So Hannah, perhaps if you could give us a bit of your backstory.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you very much for having us. It's great to come in and talk. So I'm head of products here at Addland. I've been with the business from back in the first beta launch, which was April of last year. I'm taking it through to its commercial launch when we set it alight last October. My background is very heavily in prop tech, very much in the portal world. I originally actually started my career working in land and new homes, being one of those assistants that was running around the field collecting comparables for my land director as he enjoyed the odd round of golf. So I've worked, I've worked in and out of property pretty much my entire career now, both across the UK and also internationally. And I just saw this amazing opportunity at Addland, and I was currently doing a big project at Home Track with the Zoopla. Right. And I saw the sort of opening in the opportunity of making data much more accessible and visible within the land remit of the entire ecosystem, and I sort of fell in love with the project, and here I am just over sort of a year later, and I'm still working on it.
Great stuff. And Brian, what about you?
So I'm Brian. I am the Chief Technology Officer here at Adlan. I joined right around the October launch that Hannah discussed, and I think it was my first week, really late at night. I actually pushed the button to switch the site to the new one. So I just, came in and just took credit for launching a new thing. I've been working in tech in some capacity for roughly 20 years, I think a little bit over at this point. This is my second time doing something in prop tech, but really, truthfully, the most involved I've been in it. When Hannah and Thomas, our founder, first approached me and told me about what we were doing, it was just too exciting to pass up. And I haven't turned back since, so here we are.
Great stuff, great stuff. Well, yeah, it's sobering when I think how long I've been in IT, that I started out with things like punch cards, which hopefully both of you have no idea what I'm talking about. So.
No, anyway, I can't help there.
I mean, our first sort of theme to talk about is really the whole kind of area of standardization of data and data standards. And I guess one of the things that I'm always concerned about is when we move into this digital world is that there is sometimes an illusion of accuracy when you look at things on screen. So how do we actually make sure that data accuracy is really nailed down when people are particularly looking at remote services? I know, Hannah, you mentioned about literally trudging around fields, and it's great now that people can do this stuff in a digital way, but how do we make sure that actually it's not an illusion in terms of the accuracy of what they're looking at?
Yeah, it's a really good point to raise, because I think sometimes we can be lured into a false sense of security by seeing it on a screen and thinking, well, it must be true because there's a website that told us so. But I think there is a responsibility for everybody that's involved in the industry to set a level of care and due diligence over the data that we're doing. We look at all of our data sources and audit them very regularly to try and make sure that things are kept at the highest degree of accuracy as possible. Of course, when you're working with data across a number of different data providers, and there is still a lag in the digitalization of data, especially when you're looking at things like planning. we don't yet have that uniformity of data. So there is definitely a degree of responsibility, I think, for everybody that's working within the industry to make sure that we are taking on board our own due diligence, to make sure that we are double checking and testing. We invest quite a lot in data quality assurance, our data QA, to make sure that when we're testing things, it's referred back to some other competitor products that are on the market. It's referred back to the original state, and it goes to testing kind of from data source as well, so that we can go through some different regimented checks. And I also think people should be very honest about where their data is from and what data has been modelled and what data hasn't been modelled, because there is, I think, the licensing that you have with all of the available data from the government data gateways and platforms. I think it's fantastic that everybody can access so much data, but there is quite a lot of flexibility in what you can do with that data, which potentially leads to some dangerous modelling if it's not done correctly. So I think people having the respect of data science is really going to come into its own for people to then be able to trust it. And then once you've built trust in the data, then I think from there it's just making sure that you're very, very regimented in it.
And I think on a specific point, you've recently brought some considerations data into your platform. What was the challenge around making sure that the provenance of that, the kind of trust in that, was also maintained?
A lot of science. So one of the data sets that you're talking about is we currently expose lots of different data for different grades and different levels. And the considerations data, there are 13 key considerations that we worked a lot with people in the industry to understand what are the real main things when you're first looking at a piece of land and you want to look at that due diligence of it, without going really, really detailed under the hood. My brand manager will kill me for saying this, but it's what's the fastest way of saying no?
Yeah.
So that you can move on to the things that are going to be really important to you. And we identified kind of 13 key considerations, things like flood zones, ancient woodland, green belts, listed buildings, so things that really will flash out to you. And we looked across how that data was made available, and we thought, what, we can do better than this, because we know that especially when you're looking at a piece of land with a view of doing something with it, or your client wants to do something with it, construction, planning, change of use, centimeters make a big difference. When you're looking at things like flood zones, the comparison between the boundary level of a flood zone 2 and the flood zone 3, actually there's a big difference between what you're going to be allowed to do with that land. The buffer zone for ancient woodland, meters really count there, because otherwise you could get yourself into a whole lot of trouble further down the line. So we took all of this consideration data, which is available, unfortunately, not in a nice standard format that you could just apply to all, but everyone has their own little way of cutting up the data and showing it in various different coordinate shape files, polygons. And then we looked at how that would impact all of the registered polygons of land across England and Wales. And we realised that were quite a lot of points. So we wanted to really, like you said in the original point, be true to our hearts about being as accurate as possible. So rather than just relying on sort of center points of polygons and where they might intersect with different consideration shapes and boundary levels, we thought, what, in this day and age, it's just not good enough, because it really makes a big difference, the meters and centimeters. So the team, the amazing team that we have, led by a fantastic data engineer, he looked at this problem. They love a good problem, data engineers, and he said, how can we solve this? And at the end, it was the total calculation, Brian?
It was, I don't have the exact number up in front of me, but it was nearly 174 quadrillion calculations that we had to calculate.
And that just took
put
every
that into
point.
perspective. Yeah, if you're only to do a center point, it's still a big number. It's somewhere around like 9 quadrillion, but I mean, it's just orders of magnitude.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy.
But as you say, to move away from that fairly sort of low-tech centroid approach, you do need that order of magnitude of kind of points, don't you?
And
Yeah.
you need to keep doing it as well,
Yeah.
because the data is updated every month. There's a new change data set that's
Yeah.
produced. We know that flood data is getting much more regularly produced now, because sadly the world is changing faster than we would all like it to. But we all need to be aware of every time there's a data change, to make sure that we can refresh that data and give real accuracy on the measurements. So every point of every polygon is calculated against every point of every consideration data.
Yeah.
So that it really gives our members some trustability in their data assessment. So they can, that horrible word that my brand head of brand will kill us for, but that say no faster is really, really critical. If you have to get in your car and go down to have a look at a site because you're not sure about that boundary line to that flood zone, well, if you're able to do that remotely from a desktop, then it's going to save you so much time, and so you can focus on the stuff that's really going to be important and can move everybody's business forward.
Indeed, and I don't think you should ever feel guilty about that kind of say no quicker, because it's a theme I've come across in whether it's lending, whether it's looking at buying and selling assets that are already built. People want to kind of get that pipeline, that funnel of opportunities down as quickly as possible, and then still have the human element of physically going to see sites, seeing assets. So I think it's a very common theme of using data for that kind of triage approach, really, isn't it?
Triage is a great word to use there. Yeah.
Exactly. So I've always been very kind of struck as I've worked in the industry for a long time now, both in the built environment and technology, is that our sector particularly suffers from this huge issue of both being very fragmented in terms of the number of actors, but fragmented in terms of the, as I call them, archipelagos of data. Data sources are scattered around, and I guess the biggest challenge and opportunity for data and technology is actually to join these various sets of data together, some of which have previously been hidden. So it'd be great to hear your views on how you've been able to do that aggregation, particularly when, as you say, they're all in different formats. They don't have necessarily the good kind of identifiers that you can use and link them together. But I guess that's really the power of what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll probably let Brian talk a bit on the technicalities of all the data, and then maybe I can just add a little bit on the visualization of it afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, really, it starts with making sure that you trust the source. Luckily, most of the sources that we need to deal with here are trusted government sources, so that we can. It's pretty easy to say yes to using these. And then from the technical side, it really starts with us needing to be able to have a trusted way to actually bring in the data, so that as we bring it in and start to change it into what we need it to be, to start joining it with other things, we know that we can trust that we're not going to modify it in some way that then makes it an inaccurate data source. So we have a lot of automated processes to where when somebody updates their source, we can go out and get a copy of that, bring it in, filter out the parts that we need versus what we don't need, keep that. And if there's certain IDs that don't exist across them, sometimes we have to get creative and create an ID that we can add to something to be able to keep things together. Sometimes we have to look at things like addresses, which gets extremely complicated sometimes, right? Because they're not always accurate. But sometimes it can be as simple as trying to figure out where an address joins with something else or some other government identifier. And then go through. An interesting thing with thinking of the considerations that we just talked about is you can have the computer do all of these calculations for you, but you can't just completely trust that it's done it right. We know that computers are good at calculations, but you still have to go back and test those things. So sometimes we have to find points through there that we know what the distance is going to be, so that we can go back and sanity check, spot check through the data set. We obviously can't check every single record. So there are known points on the map that we can check, or sometimes we can add records into that so that we can go back and we know for a fact that our made up record is always going to be this distance. And that can give us a high degree of confidence that all of the calculations have completed successfully.
As you say, there's always that sense of the checksum, or whatever phrase you use. You need to be constantly challenging, I guess, your own algorithms and your own outputs, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, never never accept that
No.
something there is correct. Yeah, we always it's our job to find fault, you know, to try and break it and see if we can find something that's an error.
I guess another challenge that'd be interesting to get your sense of how you've been able to adapt to these things is always a bit of a moving target with land. If I think about things like the impact now of nitrate, phosphates, and you know, biodiversity offsets, how are you dealing with those kind of moving targets? Because it is a moving target in terms of considerations and issues that people need to be thinking about with land.
Yeah, it is, and I think it has quite a bit of a way to go still, both in education from all of us in the industry and consumers, and also the availability of some of that information and how it can be. I think there's a big challenge into taking something that is a bit complex and a bit unknown and a bit undefined and putting it into a way that is easily accessible for everybody, from a first-time consumer using it all the way through to a professional that's well versed in that arena. Making complex data usable and accessible, especially when you're using a visual platform, is a big challenge to overcome. And I think that everybody is still learning in it. We are still very much learning. You know, we're just about to release a different color grading actually for different for identification of different polygons, because we realize that the more data you add in to the tools to make more accessible, suddenly you sort of hit that tipping point of it starting to become unusable. You know, if there's anyone that's trying to access the data and visually on the map and being able to see it all, not being able to have that shown in accessible colors, if you're colorblind, for example, you know, these are big things that we need to get past, and we need to make sure that our tool really is something that is accessible for everybody. And we invest a lot in UX, and we have an accessibility champion that sits within the team that goes through all of these checks to make sure that we try, and sometimes we have to adapt the complexity of the data to make sure that it is more accessible. So it might not be at level 10, it might be at level 8, but that level 8 is something that everybody can use. And I think that that's really important. When it came to looking at exposing things like nitrate vulnerable zones and the different breakup of data with that, that was something that was a bit of a challenge for us to do visually, because if you just look at a map of the UK and say, okay, show me everywhere that might be within a nitrate vulnerable zone, most of the country.
Yeah.
So you suddenly go, right, if we put that across a map, it's going to make the map quite hard to use then. So what we looked at doing is actually took the different information sets that we had specifically about nitrate vulnerable and safeguarded zones, broke that up into their subcategories, and then we were able to sort of look at that as like a map key, so that a user can identify much easier the different types of nitrate vulnerable. So especially for our agricultural users, you know, that it's really important for them to understand the land in that more specific detail. For construction and general consumers, it's more about, okay, it says nitrate vulnerable, do I need to worry about that? Is that something I need to do? So it's then taking some of that guidance that is publicly available, you know, from the government, but just putting it into a product that is more user friendly. You know, sometimes the government portals, maybe I shouldn't say this on a webcam, they're not the easiest to use. I think we can all be in agreement that the usability of a lot of them, it's not uniformed across, you know, the different sub gateways and things, and it's not quite intuitive, you know, as we're all used to doing things really quickly on our phones and different apps. So our job really, as I see it, is to bring all of these new technologies, new ways of dealing with data, new ways of managing accessibility for data visualization, bring that all together, pull it all in, and then give it back to people to be able to use. So nitrate is a great example about how to use that. For the biodiversity, we have started to actually list land for biodiversity net credit.
Yeah.
So it's a new category for us to have as listing. So you can search for land on Adland, development land, bare land, farmland, etc. We now have a new environmental category, and we have biodiversity as a category. So if someone specifically wants to search for this type of land, we can put it in. I do think that there is a level of education that needs to sit alongside that for people to understand a bit more about what it's like. So we're working with a number of different people within the industry just to make sure that what we're saying is aligned to what else is out there, because with something new like this, if you start to say two different things, it just increases the confusion for consumers. So we've got a great opportunity where, you know, we've already built up a platform that is the most used land platform in the UK in just a few months. So we have this great opportunity to now make that link between something that's a bit confusing to something that a consumer that can understand. You know, all, you know, generally I do the mum and dad test, you know, can my mum and dad read this, and they can understand what it means. I mean, my dad was a QS, so he kind of knows a bit more than you, but
I mean, yeah, we've talked so much, Hannah and Brian, about the kind of visualization issue of this. Can you perhaps show us the platform and perhaps highlight some of the things we talked about, whether that's flood or nitrates or considerations? Because I think this particularly as a whole subject area is about that user interface, as you've said. It's about people actually having a screen in front of them and being able to use it in a way that's hopefully fairly intuitive, dare I say, because people shouldn't have to be IT experts to use it, should they?
Yeah, you're totally true. Brian, you happy? I can share my screen and we can
go for it.
run a little bit of research or something.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
So hopefully you can see my screen here.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of different sort of experience entry points for our members, our users to come into Adland. So you have the main part of the landing page, the home page, and the find experience within our find area, and that's where people can look and search for land that's currently available and is being listed by a marketing agent. And then we have our more professional end users that sort of dive straight into the research, and these are the ones that are more generally looking at land that's off market, or they're just doing sort of due diligence and assessments on different pieces of land. So if I take us through an experience, I can enter a location here. We can go, you know, directly over to our research map. So this will now load the map and make accessible all of the different data layers that our members will have access to. And if I take an area, so let's take, Andrew, whereabouts are you located?
Will you take a postcode, or do you want sort of a name or something?
As you wish, a town.
Put in Richmond, RICHMOND, and it's not the Yorkshire one, it's the Surrey one. So yeah, Richmond upon Thames, that kind of borough.
There we go. So this will take us in here, and we have all of our polygon layers as well in. So as we zoom, as you can zoom into the map, you can now see all of the polygon layers loading up with all of the different areas, all of the different registered titles that have been broken up and made visible. So let's say, for argument's sake, we're having a look at this area. So it's Clifford Road, and we're looking at this area and potentially looking at a bit of research on a corner plot. So all of our members are able to sort of have a look and a play around between different registered title polygons, and then go and sort of search in a bit more detail about what's happening within them. So we expose the title number, the registered address that sits next to that title number. You were saying before about the sort of slightly complex information with title hierarchies and polygons and everything. So if there are more than one address that's associated to a title number, we also show the option of different addresses, because that's a minefield in itself.
Yeah.
Information about the title. It's a state interest, so you know this one's great because it's a freehold title. The size in acreage. If there's any nearby land for sale, we'll show it here. So if you're looking at a bit more of a comparable research for land that's available, there's a link there that you can have a look at what's available. We currently have about, Brian, what's the current count of available listings?
Of available, it's just under 3,000.
Just under 3,000, yeah.
Yeah.
I knew it was sort of circling top twos. Then there's more information about the boundary, about where that polygon, that title sits. So if there's if you need to, especially sometimes when you're on the cusp of between two different districts or parishes, it's important to expose that information. And then the consideration data that we were talking about earlier in the call, this is then exposed in its specific data format. So if there is anything that is 0, so within the boundaries of every point of that polygon, or under 50 meters from that polygon, we highlight it in red just to show, you know what, maybe we need to have a little look at this one in more detail. Within 2,000 meters or 2 kilometers, we then highlight that one just in orange, just to say, not critical, but it's something you need to be aware of. And then over 2,000 meters or 2 kilometers, we make the information accessible for people to have a look, but we understand it's not something you need to dive in and have a look at. And from the menu on the other side, you can then see that data. So if I take one, I probably chose a terrible area that wasn't near a flood zone, something that was going to help us. But if
you just move slightly closer to the Thames, you'll get closer to the flood
that's
zone.
what I was thinking. So there we go, flood
Yeah.
zone 2 and flood zone 3 there. So we have actually split those out because we realized that actually the difference between flood zone 2 and flood zone 3 is quite a lot. Now if I go down to here, so I've opened up my considerations data. So this is then showing the considerations that I can now display on the map. So if I looked at, I've got listed buildings, and flood zone 2 and 3 is now a critical for me to have a look at. So I can go and select that specific polygon, and then that's going to layer that information over the top of my map, so I can see exactly the more intense flood zone 3 area and the more opacity flood zone 2 area, and how that impacts my polygon. So I can see there, actually, this is going to be a bit of a problem for me, this specific title. If there are listed buildings as well, which flagged, I can turn my listed buildings on, and it will just indicate where those listed buildings as well are also located when I'm doing my checks. So all of these, the polygons here that are available here, all of the consideration data is either shown visually in a shape file. So Ancient Woodland is too far away, so we're not going to be able to see that one. So they're either in shape files, they're either pinpoint, so listed buildings is an exact location. Public rights of way, you'll be able to see the cross paths of all of those public rights of way. And then you can move on into more, let's say, specific details for your use class. So for agricultural users, we have some more information. So your nitrate vulnerable zone is just there. Let's turn off our flood zone so we don't get confused. So our nitrate vulnerable there, ALC categorization of the land as well is available if we need to have a look at it. And there we've started to split up the levels of information. So if I go to agricultural, I can see there are none present currently. If we picked a polygon in the east of England, we would probably see a list of all of them that are listed there for different areas. And then
how
for
about
planning.
Sorry, that's exactly what I was going to ask actually, Hannah, was the planning. Intrigued to see what comes up when you click on the planning button.
Well, let's have a look. Planning data, exposing planning data, I think is, in all of my years of prop tech, is one of the most annoying, frustrating things I have to work with. Because rather than taking information from a single source, you're looking at hundreds of different local planning authorities, and there is no, as much as the data should be publicly available, there isn't a lot of uniformity as how that's displayed and how that can be accessible and how often that's updated. So bringing that all from all of these different sources and normalizing it and then putting it into a tool that people can then trust, I'd say it's an ongoing challenge for anybody in this arena. I don't think there's anybody that absolutely nails it. It's a very difficult thing to overcome. So it is definitely a work in progress, our planning data. What we've started off with is exposing information on current and historic planning applications. And we work with another data provider as well to boost the accuracy of this and to get information that goes back for 10 years as well, so we can see a lot of that historic applications that might be really relevant to people. In some local authorities, that can go back to up to 30 years as well. It all depends on how far advanced their digitalization journey has been. Where possible, we also try and link to the planning portals. So for this particular polygon that we selected here, we have no current applications, but we can see that there are 15 recorded planning applications over the course of the last, well, anything from a decision made this year to all the way back to up to 30 years, depending on that local authority. And where possible, we will link to that planning portal. So these are all links that are within the LAM report. It's also available as a downloadable version as well, with smart links inside. So if you're sharing that, you can link directly to the planning portal. Of course, planning applications that are 20 years old, sometimes those links aren't valid anymore.
Yeah.
But we do our best to spot check and as things going and refine the process and listen a lot to our customers who come back and say, oh, there was a planning here, I can't find it on this, and we'll go and investigate and see what the problem was. Often it's things like the address matching, you know, where maybe something was known as 1 the High Street and it changed its name to April Cottage, the High Street, something like that, that's caused a bit of a thing. So we'll try wherever possible to spend a great deal of time spot checking that, but we'll show as much as possible to the user and continue to grow that.
How do you deal with the challenges of, you know, I live in this particular borough, and I know that, you know, I live in a conservation area, and I'm not sure that that's expressed by the borough in geospatial terms. I think it's probably just a sort of a pictorial map they use. And indeed, there's an Article 4 direction in my conservation area that's a scanned copy of a 1990s typewritten document with biro saying which street numbers are affected. I mean, how far have you been able to digitize what is effectively bits of paper?
Yeah, it's some of them are very old. I think the old settlement boundary information is one I can turn on, and you can see sort of the, you know, it's we take what's the latest available data that's there, and if it's let's just get rid of this one to make it a bit easier to see. And we, where was I? Agricultural. Let's turn this one off. And we try our best to make the polygon shape files that we can get provided available for the user to try and interpret the best way. But we know this is a constant game of refinement and refinement and refinement and refinement, and taking like the mass information that's available. So the settlement boundaries is a great example of old information that was really not digital, and then how it was translated into different coordinates and shape polygon files to be able to expose that. But actually we've got a project that we want to kick off that's going to get a lot more detail into the specific region by regions, so that we can update this to give the user much more specific information of the boundary lines and where that intersects with the polygon that they're of interest for. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to, when you give the opportunity for the user to select a polygon and then have all of that historic information about changes to things like settlement and urban boundary, greenbelt boundary lines over the history of time. So they've got a bit more of a thorough understanding of what's happened in the life cycle of that piece of land and how things have changed, because especially if you're looking for any future change of use and planning, it can be really critical to know how likely a decision is going through if you've seen a bit more leniency on some of those boundary changes and where they've intersected your piece of land.
That's been really helpful. Sorry, Brian, do carry on.
Oh, okay, I was going to say, there's thinking specifically of the planning data as well. There's just interesting challenges as you go, because the local authorities need to make that information available to us, but they don't have to, you know, tell us if they're going to change how they're presenting it or things like that. So sometimes you may go into an area and you know that, okay, here's all the planning information that we have, and then you come in tomorrow and all of a sudden it's completely out of date, and it could be because the local authority has decided that they want to change the way that they present that. Now, if you're a human going to the site and navigating it, you may not notice it. You're going to find your application, but when we have to have an automated process that goes and gets that stuff, you know, you then have to go back retroactively and then adjust so that you can start displaying that. So it definitely keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, we have a mixture of like live calls that are made, you know, millions of times, and monthly data builds, quarterly data builds for different data sets, and then the infrequent ones that you just get a notification to say, hey, we just updated our public rights of way. Here you go and have a look, and then interpret all of our information.
Yeah.
Well, that's been really helpful. I guess what would be interesting to move on to is almost the kind of the human side of this, in the sense that you know, our professionals, they want to use this data, to be blunt, to be more productive, more effective. How are you seeing people use this in the way that it's changing the flow? I mean, we talked earlier about that sense of being able to say no earlier, but how are you seeing people using this, and how is it kind of changing in a positive way the way people are looking at land?
Do you want to go, Brian? You've probably all been bored of me talking too much.
Well, yeah, I mean, you typically say these things a lot nicer than I do, but I think the most part is, as we've kind of touched on several times throughout this discussion, is a lot of this data is available, but it's scattered about. And you have to go to this portal, that portal, you have to go to 13 different places to see the information that you need to be able to make a decision on it, on a particular plot of land, and multiply that by everything that you're interested in. So by bringing this all together, it's just making land easy, right? Like, it's making people get to know, it's making people get to the decisions that they need to know. With a couple clicks of their mouse, some visual representations on a map can really help them just, you know, nope, don't want to look at this one. Oh, this one's interesting. And the feedback that we get from the people who are using the platform is that's what we're achieving, right? They're able to come in, they're able to see all that things and make their decisions.
Yeah, and then it's about stimulating a bit the market as well. So, you know, by making this more of a consumer-friendly way of accessible the data, we're hoping just to make, you know, those that want to build their dream project, you know, like you've been saving your whole life and your career, and you want to build your dream project, and you're ready to go for it. And we want to open that up so that it is really accessible to search for land, research the land, find it out. So it stimulates some more of that market movement, which actually benefits every single person within the whole of that industry cycle. You know, everyone from the surveyors to the architect to the agents to, you know, everybody involved, the bricklayers, everybody starts to benefit if we can get this cycle more available. You know, we're still, self-build is still very low in the UK compared to the rest of Europe. And okay, we might not have as much pieces of land as our population grows, but I think, you know, with the struggles that people have to get onto the property market in the first place, the difficulties of the cost of living and how it's going, you know, being able to build homes that are more sustainable, being able to have more control and more power over the home that you live in and what you build, you know, if we can help that in some small way, then I think that we're doing a good job.
But I guess it's also important, and I think this is something we've touched on a number of our discussions with our various tech partners, is that this technology is not replacing people. I'm getting a very strong message that people are using this to filter, but they're then still, you know, getting their wellies out and going to see sites, and that they're still actually not abdicating responsibility to the due diligence process to technology, but saying actually this is a useful part of the process, but there's nothing quite like getting out on the site and actually really understanding its context.
Completely. It's actually the opposite. What we want to do is sort of stimulate activity, let people do their own bit of due diligence and self-selection, so that then when they come forward to interact with a professional, they're doing so from a much more educated space. So rather than the people in the industry doing the tire kickers and, you know, wasting their time, they're actually focusing on people that are highly motivated, that have already done a bit of their research, and then we hope that those conversations are more fruitful and beneficial to everybody involved. So it's definitely saying now it's the point that it's highlighting things to bring in the professionals rather than you can do it yourself.
But do you find, I mean, you've mentioned the word education quite a lot, I think, Hannah. Do you find that you're still having to kind of both reassure and inform people about where you're getting the data from, that whole, as I call it, provenance piece of where does it come from, how is it collected, how recent is it, does that in itself raise a red flag? Well, okay, yes, we've got some data, but this flood data is quite old, therefore that in itself would be a reason to do a little bit more digging around. Are you still having to kind of make people, once again, not trust everything almost too much, because they still have to have that kind of professional skepticism and say, well, you know, I know that area, that doesn't look right. Maybe there's something that I need to challenge there in the same way that you're challenging your own data.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it, to have a product and build it and say trust us all, but don't trust us too much because they need a bit more. So yeah, you always feel a bit strange creating that environment. But you're absolutely right. I really feel like our job is just to highlight things at the earliest stage, which so it prompts people to go in and speak to those professionals to do that much more informed due diligence. You know, our job isn't to do the work of a surveyor. Our job isn't to do the work of a conveyancer. Our job isn't to do that whole risk assessment for funding. Our job is to highlight to people that things that they need to speak to people about, so that they can be that they can mitigate that risk to move forward in their project. I think we want to always be very transparent with where our data is from, and also be transparent in this is a early due diligence checker, this isn't a full report. But you know, and we try and make sure that our price point is always kept very low to try and you know, support that. We don't want to make people have to pay loads of money for things that are just earlier on in the process, because we know later on they're going to have to pay a lot for all of these specialty things, you know, down the line. So if we can be you know, this deep but this wide for people, can't see on the camera, that doesn't make much sense, rather than this but this, then I think we're going to help benefit much more people within the cycle and bringing more people into the market, into the piece.
And I guess also, you know, I mean, obviously the pandemic has driven this to some extent, but obviously there is a benefit in people not driving around the country too much. And I guess also, whilst it's always a slight tension between people parachuting into areas they don't know, it certainly means they can do that early due diligence from a distance, because, you know, at least if they do understand the area, they've got that context, but they can at least sit at their desk and do it remotely. So you're seeing more of that happening, and people literally using it as a way of avoiding, frankly, traveling around the country when they don't need to.
Yeah, absolutely, because you know, if you've got 20 projects put across your desk and you need to have a look at them, but you can quickly identify using, like, maybe we have the Ordnance Survey topography layers. So we're able to sort of use the heat map and use the scales visuals on the map as well. So if someone's having a look at it and currently see, now what you want to do there is actually on something that's like this. There's not much point of driving down there to take pictures to tell you what you can see visually on a map. So you know, we can definitely see how it's about saving time, isn't it? You know, you know, the people, the professionals in the industry, they need to be able to focus their time on the things that are going to have the biggest impact and the biggest value to their business. And if we can help save them time by taking out some of the legwork of having to go and see sites and then crossing them off, or you know, going through that list. So rather than 20 projects across their desk, 20 different site visits, actually we can take that down to 10, because you can already do that first due diligence check from a desktop really easily. Then I think that will definitely help. Well, if we can drive less people on the road, then you know, it's a little bit of a benefit for everybody as well.
Indeed. So getting your crystal balls out, both of you. What do you see as next steps as the technology evolves, and I guess, like so many good prop tech firms, you're in that kind of cycle of feedback with the market as well. What's your roadmap look like, and you know, what do you think technology will be able to add as you know, this challenge of due diligence on land continues to become more complex, arguably?
From a purely technical point of view, one of our main focuses is really just making sure that we just continuously evaluate and improve all of our processes of importing the data and actually doing all of what we need to do to present it to our users. When we talked about the considerations, it was this massive number of calculations we had to do. So the first time we did it, it was the biggest, but we have to do that every month, right? Every single time a data source for one of the considerations that we compare to changes, we need to make sure that we're updating that. Every time the title changes, right? HMLR could actually change a title boundary or split something up. So we have to run all of these things all the time. And it's not necessarily easy. So we have to just constantly reevaluate how we're doing that, making sure that we're doing it as quickly and accurately as possible, so that we can just kind of continue. And we also, you know, we need to continue to look at what the industry needs, what's important for them, so that we can go out and find the right sources for that and and bring that into our processes as well. I think Hannah will probably have a lot of other things specifically from the user that she wants to talk about, but from a purely technical side, that's our biggest focus.
Thanks. I mean, any risk before you start, Hannah? Any risk of a kind of the reverse of Moore's law, that you're going to run out of computing power given the number of recalculations you need to do?
I would hope not, but yeah, sometimes it seems pretty crazy. That initial calculation took a really long time. So we're actually looking at, even though we've already done that main calculation, we're actually actively in the background working on recalculating that in different ways, to try to actually find optimization so that we can get it down from the couple of weeks that it took, to hopefully a couple of hours in the future, so that when we get bigger tasks like that, it's not as daunting. We can have the confidence to be like, yeah, bring it on. We'll just do it. But
yeah, and we have to. I mean, we as a data and technology business as well, we have a responsibility to make sure that we can run our website and how it's used by our users in most efficient way possible as well. We have a huge amount of data and stuff to be calculated and to expose, and we have to make sure that all of the new technologies that we're implementing are aligned to kind of best practices globally for not kind of increasing our carbon footprint and our emission, our impact that we have, to be able to use the site. So yeah, there's a lot of things to have to factor in, when you do it, and sometimes some things have to be sacrificed a little bit for the greater good for other things, to make sure it's still usable.
Great.
But
Well,
in terms of products, go
carry on, Hannah. Yeah.
So just in terms of like products and stuff on the roadmap, there's we want to continue to build out things for the consumer to find land as easy as possible, and make sure that we keep keeping that flywheel turning of people within the industry and stimulating it. We want to make it much easier for people to connect with experts as well. So, if you're looking to do a project, you've done your due diligence, okay, I need to connect with an architect, I need to connect with the surveyor, I've identified that there's this risk, I need to connect with a specialist insurance, so we want to just expand it out and not look at ourselves as the traditional portal marketplace type thing, but more about a network and how we can really grow this network of Adland members, for people that wherever you are in that cycle or your level of expertise, you can always connect to people to be able to move things forward. And there's a lot of data work that we're doing to make it much easier for people to filter down and really identify the site. So we've got some really cool things coming out over the course of the next few months as well. So keep logging in and having a look. It will keep changing. We tend to deliver at a very rapid pace. We're a new business, but our delivery line is generally around every 14 days. We're pushing a new release out into production, so we're very fast. We learn quickly. We'll fail quickly if we make a mistake, and because you can't move that fast without making mistakes. But we just keep connected to everybody within the industry and that's using our application, so we can try and make it as best as possible for everybody to use.
No, and I suppose reflecting back on your point about encouraging more self-build, it's really important that network is there, that a self-builder can say, look, this is a site we want, it's on a slope, I need to talk to a specialist now to understand the groundworks and really, is it still viable? It's where I want to build it, but I'm a bit concerned, or the services are miles away, how much is it going to cost me to get electricity or mains drainage or whatever they feel they want. So
absolutely, and we want to bring you all in together in the same place, so you don't have to like look here and go and search here and here and say, well, actually you found that, you've identified there's a risk there and there's something you need to investigate. Now I can easily connect you then to an expert in our network that can help take that forward.
Indeed. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I'm sure we want to catch up soon and see what your next few sprints deliver. But for today, Hannah, Brian, thanks ever so much. Great to talk, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.